Hi everybody and welcome to Fraudible, the official podcast of the International Society of Economic and Criminology. Fraudible is the video podcast that brings together academics and practitioners to discuss all things fraud. In this episode we're going to be discussing fraud and vigilantism, and on this episode I'm so excited to be joined by academic and Dr Jack Whittaker. And hi. and for the purposes of anonymity, a practitioner who goes by the name of Roger. So thank you very much, guys, for joining me today. Jack, could I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr. Jack Whittaker. I recently completed my PhD on consumer fraud. I'm one of actually the very few people who have published on the topic of vigilantism and fraud. So this is a really exciting episode for me, and I'm looking forward to talking to a real-life chicken about it.
A real-life chicken, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of this. And that's the tone for the episode, guys. Yeah. Here we go. Thank you, Jack. And Roger, the same to you, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, hi, I'm Roger, and I have a little YouTube channel where I post videos about scams. I try and make light of them and make a bit of fun and, try and identify where they're sort of like, where they stand out from like regular business and things like that. So I'm nothing special. I'm just someone that sits at home and makes videos, really.
And what are the types of frauds that you deal with as well?
Yeah, so I've looked at a lot of a lot of different types. I've looked at like tech support fraud that comes out of India. I've looked at a lot of like crypto sort of MLM sort of based fraud. These kind of, we call them entrepreneurs. That's what they like to call themselves, but they're kind of like fake influencers / follow me.
I believe the Australian term is wealth coaches, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they seem to rinse and repeat quite a bit. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all sort of follow this law of attraction, which is kind of weird. One thing that I've sort of uncovered, which I thought was really, really weird and interesting and very culty, to say the least.
Yeah, very.
Okay, cool. So, Jack, give us some background on this topic then. So, why do people engage in it?
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent opening question. And I think one thing that we've got to think about here is that vigilantism is actually probably the world's oldest form of policing. Our police forces were originally vigilantes, and it's just happened throughout history. Really good example of that is Creature of Frankenstein from the movie, where you see the crowd holding the torches and going after the monster. That is a perfect example of vigilantism. Another example is from the westward expansion into San Francisco in California, talked about very much in depth. And then, as we've had crimes, moving onto the internet, we've seen, the growth of so-called vigilantism. And two of the main kind of ways in which this has happened is we have online paedophile hunting, which is very, very controversial. And we've also got scam baiting, which we're going to be talking today about. And I should mention as well, there's actually been one conceptual paper academically that's been published on vigilantism. And what we know is there's kind of two conditions when vigilantism occurs. It occurs when the police are seen to have not been good at policing a certain thing. So perfect example of that is online paedophiles. That as a result has created its own vigilantism movement trying to counter that. And the other kind of condition where you see vigilantes popping up is sensational crimes. And again, that also happens in these instances. And in the context of kind of scam baiting and vigilantism, we had kind of the growth of the Nigerian 419 email, which was, hi, I'm a despot dictator and I have this big, haul of gold. Would you like to, give me a small fee to unlock this big tranche of gold in return? And you had a forum called 419 popping up. And their job was simply to reply to these emails and waste, the fraudster's time. And that has been going on since the early 2000s. Now, more recently, we have the growth of YouTube scam baiters, such as Roger here. And Roger's one of the small guys, but what I should mention is you have people like Jim Browning, Kit Boga, Trilogy Media, Scammer Payback. And many of them now have millions of followers. And some of them have even quit their day jobs to do this on a full-time basis. So it's really an absolutely fascinating trend. And I will stop talking now.
Thank you, Jack. Roger, why and how did you get into this then? What triggered it?
Yeah, I guess it was just more of a case of seeing the massive sort of lies and misinformation and manipulation that's happening online. And I just sort of, especially this year, I've sort of upped the amount of videos that I've been creating lately and sort of opted for I guess you could say, quantity over quality approach. Because I sort of feel that it's almost like a civic duty that we should sort of stand up against these people. And I don't want to beat around the bush, but these people, they are selfish. They're only in it for themselves, and they're bullies.
Yeah.
And they're the kind of people that we should call out. We should stand up to these people. We've got people like Andrew Tate that are have this whole online following that for some reason people idealize these people. You can look at Logan Paul running his crypto scams. Even some of the stuff that some of these big influencers do. I don't understand how they still have a platform after they do these things. But for some reason they do.
Yeah.
And for some reason they're just allowed to keep rinsing and repeating and doing it again, and it sucks.
Yeah, I agree. And Roger, just one thing that I'd like to kind of prime you on there is one thing, because I have been a part of your Discord now for quite a while, and I think what you do is extremely important. Just for the sake of the listeners, I think one thing that I should point out that you might be able to talk about is the type of fraudsters that you see, particularly in kind of the Ponzi scheme space, who are, these finfluencers and who are promoting themselves as wealth coaches. They're not the type of people that, that this kind of face of crime that you imagine, where you have, this guy with a swag bag and a balaclava on running out of a bank.
Yeah, no.
These people, could you just talk about the demographics of what you're seeing? I think it's so important.
Definitely. They look good.
Yeah.
They've got professional social media campaigns happening, professional graphics, professional photography. A lot of them, the way I sort of see it happen is it's almost like once they make their first big win, they'll reinvest that into reimagining their brand and coming out with new websites, and they target press releases and things like that, and build up their SEO rankings, and so there's also a pretty generic formula that they follow. They tend to use platforms like Facebook and Instagram and social media marketing through those platforms. Often I see short form content because I sort of think that it's easier to bait a reaction with short form content. There's a lot of conspiratorial type thinking in amongst us as well. There's always the underlying narrative of not to trust the government, not to trust the banks, the system's there to bring you down. So put your money into crypto, and in my experience, outside of buying drugs on the dark web, I really don't see a use for crypto apart from people that are whales that are controlling the supply, that are running pump and dumps, that are releasing meme coins, doing these kind of rug pulls. They're just, I've got probably 15 years of experience in developing business applications and databases. And in my experience, I like the technology of the decentralized networks and the blockchains, and there is some really good tech there, but it's just without regulation, it's just open for exploitation.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing this sort of hype of all the Bitcoin millionaires coming out and saying, you know, this is how you make money. Buy Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, and it's just...
Yeah, I think as well, you know, one thing that I just want to touch on with you is, even though you have these like very professional looking people, you have, you know, people like Jessica, I'm not going to say her last name, who is a early 40s, very glamorous promoter, who is promoting, you know, this notion of feminism and, you know, that women should, you know, be with her because, you know, they can have financial freedom. But then you have moments where, you know, talking about this notion of the criminal with the swag bag, you've actually managed to kind of demask them. And I think that's been really fascinating. There's a woman called Martine, Roger, who obviously you know very well.
Yeah.
And can you just talk about a moment that you had with her where it kind of showed her true nature?
Yeah, so, well, there's actually been a couple of those.
Yeah.
There was one time where we were on one of her Zooms and, you know, asking questions, and it wasn't me. I won't say it was me that posed the question, but someone posed the question about that why, you know, they're a bit disappointed that the ASIC regulators haven't gotten onto her sooner. And she came back at us with a, "You're not going to stop me," and stuck a finger up. And it's very much the law of attraction. I don't know if you've seen it or seen The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. I believe that was a pretty big, they call it a documentary, but it's a cult grooming video. And it's all about, the idea is to believe something, believe you already have it, and then the universe will manifest. And obviously, if you didn't achieve, if you didn't receive, that's your own fault for not believing properly. It's insane to me.
Yeah.
Like I try and base my reality on like rational thought and things like that, and it's just insane to see that people can just expect things like this, and also like the whole selfishness of it, because it's all about like abundance and what can I attract to myself, and how much money can I make, and it's just a weird attitude. I don't understand it.
Well, I think kind of one way that you can understand it is not only are scam baiters people who interact with offenders, but at the same time, you have a lot of victims that have come towards you from the MLM space, you know, because you are recognised very much as an authority on Ponzi schemes in Australia. And I think, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but one thing that I've noticed is if I warn somebody that something is a consumer fraud, they go, "Oh yeah, you're right." If you're dealing with the victim of a complex Ponzi scheme who has been groomed for months and months, you know, the level in which they've been groomed is similar to something like Scientology, where, you know, they believe in it, even though they're out of the group dynamic at this stage. And I think Danny DeHeck, you know, who is another person who exposes Ponzi schemes, talks about it very well, which is that you have to go through kind of like a cult deprogramming, if I'm right.
Yeah, I've spoken to Danny quite a bit about it as well, and yeah, it's very much like a religion. Yeah, these people are being taught that, like, well, first they put money on the line, but they also get given like a ready-made community, sort of like when someone joins a church. And so then you've got a whole group of like-minded people that are all there, regurgitating each other's nonsense, and you know, you sort of end up in this echo chamber, and you're being told that, like, as long as you don't give up, and as long as you believe, and as long as you try hard, and you'll eventually get there. Get there. So if they start complaining about a loss, that's not part of the way they're supposed to behave, because they're supposed to behave as though they already have what they want.
Well, you're a hater then if you get excommunicated.
Yeah, and any sort of negativity is like frowned upon. They don't want anything to do with it, because as you can imagine, like, you know, we're talking about like attracts like. So if you surround yourself with negativity, you'll end up being negative. So someone from the law of attraction certainly doesn't want to be a a nurse or a police officer or anything like that. But they'll target those people to say that the system is broken. Here is your out. Here is your way to abundance, and here is And then for the people that are able to continue to recruit more, it's easy street for them. They're making a lot of money. But the people that just see it as an investment, they don't get their investment back.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you've got all these people dancing around saying, look at how much we're making. People scratching their head going, why? Why aren't I? And the response to that is like, you didn't believe properly, or you didn't try hard enough, or you didn't do what I did.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of add on that. You've kind of very eloquently talked about, these very convincing, very manipulative promoters of Ponzi schemes. How are you currently fighting them at the moment, Roger? And do you think that your actions are having much effect? What would you like to see more of?
My way to fight it is by trying to make them look dumb. So when people search for these people, they go, oh, maybe there's a little bit more behind the facade. Because we're all just like ordinary people. Even these greedy money hoarders, they're still ordinary people at the end of the day. They're still human beings. They still, do all the human being things. So it's nice to sort of like knock them off their pedestal a little bit and make them not look so shiny around the edges. But then sometimes they use that as part of their marketing to say, look, I'm just like you. I can't spell properly. I can't, do my hair properly. Look at my makeup's a mess today, whatever. But, I
Lorian's a great example of that, isn't he? Where he goes, I was a school dropout and I was a meth addict, and I was living homeless on the Gold Coast. But now I have this amazing life, living in this high rise. All you need to do is follow my magical formula, and you too can unlock, happiness.
That's a good point, because a lot of the MLM recruitment is not just about selling the product. It's about recruiting someone that's going to be able to follow the mantra, get the social media following, and keep growing the business, so to speak.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is like, Andrew Hawkes, one prime example. He does the "What's your thing?" and it's the whole concept is like, identifying what your story is. And so if you follow his masterclass, he will teach you all these things and also sell you some Ponzi's along the way.
Yeah. And just for just for listeners that don't know, who's Andrew Hawkes?
So Andrew Hawkes is one of the Dow One promoters.
Yeah.
He's been working closely with people like Bruce Hughes, Joseph Hite, Alex Bodie, these kinds of pretty ordinary people. They've recently involved Andrew Tate into their mix of their foundation, or whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
Dennis Luce is another one. They've been excommunicated, I guess you could say, from the US, but obviously with the anti-government, anti-regulator narrative, well, that's just the government and the regulators trying to silence their freedom and their autonomy, and
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, when we look at like you've only got so much money going in and so much money coming out. Like, you can't literally like turn 1 million into 2 million. But this is what they promise will happen within their system.
Yeah.
But if they have $1 million going in, there can only ever be 1 million come out. There can't be more. They've got no other source of money, so it doesn't. I don't understand why people don't see it on such a simplistic level sometimes. But they buy the whole dream that, you follow this, you follow me, you follow the rules of the law of attraction, and you'll have a life of abundance, and you'll never want for anything again.
So when
something we all wish we could have.
Well, I gotta say, I'm personally pretty happy with my life. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have abundance, but
ethics. Let's talk about ethics, guys.
I think that's an amazing topic.
There'll be many people in the industry, I'm sure, for example, Becky Holmes, who likes to essentially take the mick out of these individuals by delaying the effects of their crime by essentially talking to them for as long as possible so that they can't do this to other people. I've done it a few times if I've been really bored and I get an Instagram message from someone who's obviously a con. I think, right, I'm going to have some fun with this.
Yeah.
Are there things that people who do this need to bear in mind? Is there a limit to the extent that we can go?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And I think before you interact with a criminal, one thing that you've got to keep in mind is that they are a criminal. It's not silly fraud, silly scammers, who are committing unethical behaviours. Some of these individuals are kind of hardcore criminals who have connection to terrestrial offending. Perfect example of that is someone that Roger's dealing with at the moment. The syndicate themselves are involved in human trafficking. And we know that really well. And they are involved in Romanian organised crime. So I think, one thing is we've got to keep in mind that these are actual criminals. And that, it's not just a harmless bit of fun. The second thing, too, is I think, something that Roger can probably talk a bit more about is scam baiters themselves are often untrained and they have to learn on the job. As a result of that, they don't often know the nuances of the situation that someone like, a trained professional, for example, like me who studied fraud for, 5 years now and has written X amount, and you, Claire, as a practitioner might have. I give you a really perfect example of that. There is a YouTube channel called Trilogy Media. And one of the things they do is they go out and they go and shame money mules in the real world. They turn up at a money mule's house and they will start shaming them. I think that's really a terrible thing to do. And I don't quite think they understand the harm of what they're doing for two reasons. And the first is not all money mules are complicit, which we know from the fraud literature. You can be the victim of a romance fraud, for instance. You can be duped into, oh, hey, baby, would you like to send money over? Or you can be recruited through a fake jobs scam, as another example. Payment processing assistant is always a good one to use. And then also as well, in the real world, we don't know anything about these people in terms of, if it is a complicit money muler, are they dangerous? Could they pull a gun on you? And then, you look at kind of the audience of scam baiters. Quite a lot of them are younger people. And therefore, are you teaching them that it is okay to go out and do this sort of thing in the real world? Likewise, another example of that is with hacking. Hacking, irrespective of the context, unless you are a penetration tester, where you have the consent of the party you are hacking, is illegal. And you have many scam baiters. A perfect example of that is Jim Browning, who will hack into call centers. Irrespective of the intentions of what he is doing being good, you are still committing an illegal activity. And I've been at conferences before where a very famous scam baiter stood up in front of a room full of law enforcement and said, I would like to do what I do, but legally. And I thought that was quite a brash admission that they understand what they're doing is illegal. And that obviously has repercussions for the audiences then, where, are you teaching them that what they are doing, that hacking, for example, is okay in certain circumstances. And I think that is really boring because you open up a whole can of worms then. And, particularly many of these people are children in the audience. Are they getting an introduction into hacking for the lulz, as it were? Are they likely to go off and commit harm? Because, it could be that a good guy starts off good and then goes bad. We just don't know. So, yeah, Roger, I realise there's quite a lot to unpack there, but I think you probably want to talk about Trilogy Media and, a bit about how you operate as well.
Yeah, definitely. So this sort of brings me to, a situation that happened probably around about this time last year, where I was presented with a situation. I basically intercepted a victim that was being manipulated into muling money for some scammers that I think are over in South Africa, maybe somewhere. That's a bit of an educated guess. But yeah, and Jack and I had this conversation. It was like, do I want to put this on YouTube? And on one side, it could possibly grow the channel and get me a following and do all that. But then on the other side, we're talking about a real human being.
Mm.
We're talking about someone who's now in a heightened emotional state. That's not, I didn't even want to present her the option to say, would you like to do this? Because, she was at the position of being out of pocket of, I'll give a roundabout figure of $150,000. So nothing to be sneezed at. And she was being used by some scammers that I was talking to act as an intermediary to funnel the money that I was giving them out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And her plan, which she opened up to me and told me that she was considering taking the $90,000 that I was supposed to be sending through and keeping that for herself, essentially putting herself on the run from the scammers, as well as committing crimes, stealing money from me, which obviously, I wasn't dealing with real money. So at that point, it was like, we've got to pull the plug. I reported everything to the police in the state where this person lived, and I heard back about 3 months later to say that they finished conducting their investigation. Thank you for sending them what I sent. So I hope that they were able to intervene and pull her out. That was my ultimate goal. It wasn't about trying to build a YouTube channel or get clicks, and none of that. Some of that was live streamed at the time, and so I since took all those down. These people have been taken advantage of. She's even though she was about to do something scummy, she was manipulated into doing that. So I can sort of see that nuance there, and she needed protecting. She didn't need to be paraded on the internet.
And I kind of just like to follow up with you about that, Roger, which is obviously, you can talk about this a lot more because you're a smaller channel, but do you think that there is a conflict of interest perhaps for the larger YouTubers, which is to what extent, should they be monetizing their content and seeking out sensationalism? And what is their responsibility to the victims of the crime that they are supposedly policing?
If you want to look at monetizing sensationalist content, that's not just a scam baiting thing. I think that's a internet-wide sort of phenomena that we're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah.
I think when you're looking at that sort of thing, I think social networks, I think that these sort of platforms should play a better role in sort of policing content on their platforms. I obviously see why they don't. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to say that someone shouldn't monetize their content. My content's monetized. I get about $15 a month. Thanks, YouTube. Appreciate it. It helps. It buys me a coffee. But yeah, it's, people should be able to make a livelihood making content online. I fully support that. I think that people in general also need to be educated better. People should be more inclined to call these sorts of things out. And yeah, there's probably a big social dynamic shift that we need to go through.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm just curious as well. We've talked about the larger channels and, the fact that they're going out committing man-in-the-middle attacks against, fraudulent tech support centres, or they're going out into the community to kind of harass money mules. Why don't you do that?
I don't think the ends justifies the means. I think if we're going to commit a crime to prevent a crime, then we're just as bad as they are. Not interested in even trying to hack anything or gain access into something that I'm not supposed to do. The only thing I'd say that I'm guilty of is making bad videos. I have social media profiles that are set up with personas and things that I do lie on the internet, which I think that lying on the internet's a big issue that
I would have lying on the internet.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm not a cop. I'm not law enforcement. I know I'm a nobody. I'm not even educated. I didn't even go to university. All my IT experience was learned on the job. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about just being a decent human being and caring for those around us. And as a society, as a species, we should stand up and protect those that are vulnerable.
So then, do you think that has the risk of creating a negative sort of stigma in this act that you do? Because if people sort of see your peers that have the larger channels who are actively going out to and track these people down and finding criminals and putting them live on the internet, do you think that controversy that they are facing might impact the work that you do?
Yeah, I think that's probably like a key underlying issue that we face as a species at the moment. Like, why are people more inclined to click on something that's sensationalized? Like, if I put $100,000 in the title of my video or on a thumbnail, if I talk to an Indian tech support scammer and get them to rage and swear at me for 20 minutes, that gets so many more views than if I'm doing something that's like trying to spread awareness about something that's happening right now. Yeah, I can kind of understand why sensationalist content works like that. Be more likely to rather place the blame on these other YouTube channels. I'd more be inclined to place the blame on social media and how they're willing to funnel sensationalist information, and often information that's full of lies and deceit and misinformation. And like I say, a lot of that conspiratorial type thinking kind of leads into a lot of the frauds that I see. And I think, for lack of a better set of words, I kind of use the idea that, like, if you can be fooled into believing one thing without evidence, then you can be fooled into believing something else without evidence. So if people are willing to believe that there's a shadow government with a weather machine and they're manipulating the weather, then you can convince them to believe that crypto is where you should put your money.
Yeah, Jack, do you think that the overall contribution of vigilantism is positive, or do you think that there's a negative sort of tarnish to it?
Yeah, that's a really, really complex question. I think what I will say on the record is that the actions of scam baiters in terms of what they do to offenders is negligible at best. I don't think that's where the efficacy is. Where I do think the efficacy of scam baiters is, and Roger's talked about this, is the awareness raising, which is the content itself. If you upload that to YouTube, it raises awareness. But the issue that scam baiters have is there's firstly not enough of them, and there's a whole lot more criminals. The other issue too is you're kind of teaching criminals as you go along. And I'm sure, Roger, you've also found this with your own kind of work where you've been infiltrating offender communities, which is that once they become aware of what you're doing, then you kind of end up in this arms race, which is, the offenders then, start becoming more operationally secure. They start vetting, their potential victims that are in the Zoom meetings. You end up in this kind of situation where maybe, even the actions of law enforcement who are investigating this stuff is diminished. That in the context of scam baiting is some of the issues that I see.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always sort of like, I feel like I'm stuck in that catch-22 situation. I'm not law enforcement, quite adamant about not trying to pretend like I am. I don't want to hinder if there's a police investigation going on. My goal is to make a better world. That's what it's all about. It's not about trying to build my channel or build my, following or anything like that. But I think that there's probably a little bit of eroding of the trust of law enforcement as well. And I think that there should be more action from law enforcement rather than I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to, there should already be police onto this. There should already be education And I think it comes back to selfish people that are all about me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree with the sentiments of what you're saying, and I just kind of want to add to that. One thing that the police have missed out on that Roger's hinted at here is, why are we not using volunteers? We have special constables in the UK, for instance, and we have this great body of people who are willing to scan bait, for instance. But why are we not using this in a more responsible way? Because I'd argue that the scam baiters that I've spoken to are actually the real experts on fraud. They know more about it than the police do. And I'm more than happy to say that on the record. However, I knew a guy, for instance, who was the head of the UK Cyber Specials programme. And these were really committed people. They didn't want financial remuneration for what they were doing. And then all of a sudden, the program gets a big bucket of money, and they're bringing on paid consultants to work with the cyber specials. So all of a sudden, you have one guy sat next to you who's doing it for free, and then a consultant who's earning $2,000 a week. So that completely demeans the value of volunteerism. And it really shows that the police just have so much more to learn about how to correctly use volunteers. And that might not be even in kind of integrating them into the police force. It could just be giving scam baiters like Roger here a liaison contact and the opportunity to go to meetings and contribute intelligence. Because I know for a fact that Roger, you can probably say this, you're sat on a bucket load of intelligence of offenders that the police should be monitoring. And not just the police, also in the context of your country, the Australian Tax Authority. Because, quite a lot of the Ponzi scammers that you're dealing with, they don't pay tax. And they openly write statuses on social media where they say, I don't pay tax. But because there's so many of these offenders, and kind of the Gold Coast is the grifter capital of Australia, the police just kind of have given up, I think, in some respects. So I think, that's so important to put across, which is the police are failing in utilising volunteers. And the question too is, why are volunteers even necessary? Again, it goes back to this golden figure that I always teach my students, which is a couple of years ago, it was found in the UK that 97% of frauds reported to the police are never investigated. Again, it goes back to this whole notion of we need to book our ideas up and actually start taking this stuff seriously, which... Again, you get a lot of empty rhetoric where they go, yes, it's the volume crime of our times, it's a national security threat, etc., etc. And then we all sit around and go to meetings and have briefings and go to think tank discussions, and then we all drink a hell of a lot of alcohol, and then nothing really happens. But yeah, and another thing that I should say too is it's not all bad news. Again, Claire, it's the second time I'm on a podcast and come across as a total doomer.
That isn't my fault, Jack. I can't take any responsibility for that.
But what I will say is, one particular industry that does utilise volunteers and vigilantes is the banking sector. And me and Roger have a colleague called Chris. And Chris is an absolute animal. He pulls in over 2,000 bank accounts per year from money mules and triages them off to all the different banks in Australia. And he gets invited out to go for drinks with the banking sector in his contacts in the money laundering departments. And they've even offered him a job now to work within one of the banks. So, I just think that that's such quite an inspirational story, that if you do it in the right way, this kind of activity can have such a net positive. And it contributes real-time intelligence towards the banking sector.
Do you think it might be because people sort of want everyone to stay in their own lane? And so is that part of the issue, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, from a policing perspective, we kind of have this issue of these very siloed environments. And then, you have these very silos where you have AML in the banking sector. They have their own intelligence. Then you have the police who have their own intelligence. So, yeah, I think that kind of kingdom building aspect, which is, look at all the data that I'm sat on. You know, and you kind of like have this AML guy who's sat there like a bridge troll, sat on all this AML data, but won't share it because of, you know, proprietary commercial advantage. The private sector wants to actually safeguard because this stuff makes them look bad. It's a cost center for them, which is, you know, they want to find just enough fraud to make themselves look like they're doing something, but not enough that they don't get fined for negligence. So I think it's in itself a balancing act. But the police, you know, are under-resourced, and very much, you know, you find that the large kind of lion's share of the budgeting goes into things like, you know, going after violent offenders. Whereas, you know, it's very much out of sight, out of mind with fraud policing. So, yeah, again, you know, you have this issue of silos happening.
You see police out of the roads, you know, recording speed camera violations or speeding violations. And, you know, you see them out policing and dealing with other sorts of crime. But when it's like cyber crime, we don't see that. And from my point of view, like I've attempted to communicate with, you know, both police and regulators, and I can understand why they would be prone to confidentiality, but I do think that like better lines of communication between, like, you know, government regulators or law enforcement, like volunteers, people like myself, at least like work together a little bit instead of just receiving a blanket response that says, thank you, we'll have a look at it.
Yeah.
You know, maybe a response that says, oh, it might be worth focusing on this sort of aspect, or, you know, a little direction our way, whether, you know, what we are sending them is useful or not, you know. We sort of don't even get that sort of response.
Yeah, I completely agree with you about that. It's the same for me in academia as well. It's not just, you know, Roger, you know, who does his own thing, but, you know, I get a lot of intelligence coming to me from things like confidential informants, from, you know, victims, from the media. I'd love to be able to send that off to the police, and I probably should do. But, you know, for me personally, and again, I'm speaking here as a concerned citizen, you know, not as a fraud academic right now. With this intelligence that I'm sat on, I could happily send this over to the police, and probably an ethics committee at a university would tell me that I should do. But on the other hand, you know, I send that off. I either A, don't get a response at all, or B, I get a response that says, thank you for contacting us. You know, I think even to make us feel valued, you know, they you know, it would be nice to have something that says, we have now taken, you know, an action based off what you sent us. Would be such an important thing, and it's just one line to acknowledge that. And I think that even goes a long way. I just want to add as well that, you know, one thing that I find fascinating about the type of crime that Roger focuses on, which is Ponzi schemes, in the context of Australian offenders, you know, and this is something that shocked me, is that, you know, I go and give a fraud lecture, and I say, oh, well, the majority of frauds are coming from overseas, they're transnational, extraditing offenders is difficult, they're often in corrupt, you know, environments where law enforcement doesn't care or can be paid off. Roger's case is so interesting because you have guys, or even women, you know, who live next to you. They literally live in the same neighborhood as you, toddling around the beach, actively defrauding people. And there was, I think it was, Roger, correct me if I'm wrong, there was one presentation, and I think it was a Lorien one, and it was talking to other promoters about going to the gym and actually tapping people up in the gym in the Gold Coast.
I remember that one.
Is happening terrestrially in Australia, and nothing's being done about it.
Yeah.
And I should add as well that at the Portsmouth conference, I was speaking to an Australian colleague, and they turned around and said, the Gold Coast is known as the grifter capital of Australia anyway, so everyone kind of tolerates it, and that's fine.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of tolerating it, though.
Yeah.
Well,
you live there.
Do something about it. Yeah.
Of course. Well, gents, that is all we have time for, I'm afraid. But I could talk to you guys for hours on this. It's so interesting.
Yeah, me too.
But thank you so much to both Jack and to Roger for joining me to talk about fraud and vigilantism. And thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
My name's Claire Maillet, and this is Fraudible.